The Kershaw Camp number 10 has a relatively decent thickness for the edge, around 30 thou, angle of 15 degrees per side, and a sabre primary grind and a mid-carbon steel. So it should be exceptionally tough, strong, and overall very durable. However, there has been a number of just completely dramatic and catastrophic blowouts of this line of knives from Kershaw. So one of the things I wanted to do almost immediately with the knife was just do some very hard wood cutting. So I looked for some of the worst pieces of wood I could find to cut up with some rather severe knots in it, and went to cutting it in some of the most extreme ways possible. Lots of force, just not very precise cutting, and positioned the wood so it had a lot of movement and was bouncing around during the cut. All of this really contributes to loads on the edge of the knife. Now, would I do this with one of the knives I have optimized to cut wood really well? No. I generally would have the edge angle much lower. I'd have the edge thickness slightly reduced, and I normally wouldn't have a primary grind this heavy. But looking at this knife with how much steel there is next to the edge and how much steel there is above it due to the sabre grind, it should be very strong. And because it's a mid-carbon steel, it should be extremely tough and not have any problems with fracture, even on very hard, the hardest woodwork that I could do. Now, normally I don't jump into this kind of work immediately with a knife. I'd want to move around a little bit, do some lighter work first, and sort of work up to this. But again, Kershaw has had a number of dramatic failures with this line of knives, just complete blowouts of the edge, and even blades snapping in half during what's essentially rather mild work. So I wanted to look at sort of worst case scenario with this knife before I did anything significant in terms of seeing how it handled generally as a wood cutting tool, because I didn't want to waste a lot of time looking at it and possibly refining it and optimizing it, and then all of a sudden have major blowouts. So I spent some time doing some very hard limbing with it with no problems, and then I spent some time cutting the nastiest, knottiest wood that I could find, again with a lot of force and a lot of movement of the wood, cutting directly through the knots, cutting directly into the knots, sectioning the knots out, just doing really heavy work. Again, just because a knife fails to do this doesn't mean it's a bad knife. The only reason I'm expecting this knife should do this is because of the amount of steel that's next to the edge, the amount of steel that's above the edge, and the type of steel this knife is made from. If this knife suffered significant failure, then it's some kind of steel defect, either in the steel inherently or the way it was thermally processed, because there's too much material at the edge of this, and of the type that it is, mid-carbon steel should be very tough and very strong, so it should easily be able to handle this. My impressions of it so far doesn't seem to be any type of problems. Easily cut up this sort of nasty, knotty wood with no issues. And again, I've done probably about a half an hour of heavy knot cutting with no issues, and probably about an hour of heavy limbing with no issues. So, seems to be rather solid, and look forward to using it a bit more and seeing now how it actually works as an actual knife, doing some sensible work.